Hey Blocksters, welcome to the Blockchain Hustler, a show where we talk to the leading founders, creators, celebrities, and disruptors who are hustling in Web3. Today's guest is Rebecca Liao. Rebecca is the co-founder and CEO of Saga, a Web3 infrastructure protocol that empowers developers to build applications with their own dedicated block space. Earlier this year, Saga announced its $130 million valuation and its innovator program, which invites new Web3 developers to build apps on Saga's AlphaNet private test network. Saga just launched Andromeda, a developer tool and the first step in Saga's roadmap. Rebecca is also the co-founder of Skuchain, a currency agnostic blockchain for global trade, which was named one of the top 3 blockchain companies in trade and supply chain finance. Under Rebecca's leadership, Skuchain's platform grew to $5 billion in annual volume. Previously, Rebecca was a member of President Joe Biden's 2020 presidential campaign, advising on China, technology, and Asia economic policy. She's written for publications like New York Times, appears on Politico. She co-founded the Action Project, a creative agency of Asian American creatives and leaders. And Rebecca is also an opera singer. Rebecca, wow, it's an honor to have you join us on the Blockchain Hustler today.
Thanks so much for having me, Kaylee. It's an honor to be here. And, it's not often that people mention the opera part. And for a split second there, I thought you were going to ask me to sing. And I thought, oh, God. But you're very kind to refrain. So thank you.
Yeah,
it's a very kind intro.
Yeah, don't worry. I won't ask you to sing. I just, you have the most impressive background I've ever seen. I wanted to fit everything in. It was just incredible. And when I saw the opera singing part, I was just even more blown away. And I know there's still so much that I've missed, but starting off with this interview, I'd love to just start my first question with your journey, but particularly how you got into the Web3 space.
Yeah. So again, thanks so much for having me, Kaylee. In terms of my journey into crypto and Web3, it's interesting. So this was around 2016 timeframe. And at the time, I started my career as a corporate lawyer, so a pretty trad industry. And I always knew that I wanted to jump to the business side at startups. And so around 2016 timeframe, I had gone to my first startup. I was part of the early team at a company called Scalability, which does AI. So that's AI-based procurement of international services. We got backed by SoftBank, became a unicorn pretty quickly, but I headed up business development there, as well as founded and headed up our Asia operations. And I sort of had 2 jobs at that time. So 2016, I was really going hard on this startup, but at the same time, I was part of the Clinton presidential campaign, doing many of the same things that I did for the Biden campaign in 2020. And I was noticing that my colleagues on the campaign who had come from other industries around trade, finance, we're talking about this new technology called blockchain. And so people are still very excited about AI, but everyone, regardless of whether you were actually in the tech industry or not, you were starting to talk about blockchain. And so I thought to myself, okay, if I am in a campaign with a bunch of people who don't think about technology day in and day out, but they somehow think that blockchain is going to change their lives, then I should really look into this technology. So I started to look into blockchain, and my angle into it was really through democratizing financial services. I got fascinated by the technology itself, and the power of it was just incredible. I mean, I knew that once this technology matured, it really would lead to a revolution in how we lead our lives, particularly our digital lives. And so I left Globality, became co-founder and COO at Skuchain. Was there for about 4 years. Once the platform got to about 5 billion in annual volume, I thought, okay, at this point, the team can really take this project forward. I was starting to look around and see what the next opportunity was. And this was early 2021. So at the time, I was debating between 2 things. I was either going to stay in the private sector and stay in crypto and Web3, or I would go into government, actually, because unlike with 2016, 2020, the campaign that I worked for won. And so I was seriously thinking about going into the administration. But once you have been a tech entrepreneur for some time, I think getting used to the pace of work for the federal government government is a challenge. And so I called up a friend who's one of my co-founders at Skuchain, actually, and said, I think I'm going to stay in crypto and Web3. I think that's sort of who I am now. It's what I'm cut out for. And that's how Saga was born.
Wow, that's so fascinating. And obviously that leads us up to Saga, which I definitely want to dive into. This platform, like I mentioned earlier, it's empowering developers to build the next 1,000 chains in the multiverse. And you say that developers are kind of the unsung heroes of Web3 and deserve far better platforms, better support to build their apps and chains. Can you tell me why Saga is that solution?
Absolutely. So that's a great question. And Kayla, I so appreciate you bringing up that heroes, the heroes of Web3 really are the developers, but oftentimes they are not heralded in the same way as, say, project leaders or founders or great investors who have really rode the crypto wave to immense wealth. Developers are the reason why we have Web3. They're the reason why the space continues to move forward at a pretty dizzying pace. And so I feel that developers need to be celebrated. They need to be supported in this space. And one of the main roadblocks for developers really pushing Web3 forward was infrastructure and the availability of tools to allow them to move this infrastructure forward. So if I can get technical for a second here, many of the chains that we are familiar with, so Ethereum, for instance, I'm sure your audience will be very familiar with that, Solana, these are what we call monolithic chains. So they are big chains, applications built on top of these chains. Because you're sharing the same chain with so many other developers and applications, you run into congestion issues, you run into performance issues. The gas fees, so the transaction fees for using this chain, are quite high and variable. And these are all barriers to developing new kinds of applications in Web3 that are more user-friendly. They're also barriers to development for blockchain developers themselves. And so at Saga, what we said to ourselves was, we are at that cusp where we've gotten so much adoption in Web3 already. In order to get to the next level of adoption, we need to vastly improve that infrastructure. And in order to do that, we need people to get onto their own chains. Build your own Ethereum, build your own Solana. It's easier said than done, but we're trying to make it a lot easier, hence the next 1,000 chains in the multiverse. On Saga, developers are able to automatically spin up their own chains for their applications. These chains can speak to one another, so you don't lose the community aspect of it. And you get all the benefits of building on your own chain, and hopefully that gets reflected in the applications themselves.
Gosh, why are sovereign chains that communicate freely with one another kind of the future of crypto infrastructure, and why is now the time to move in that direction?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so what we're seeing is that if you have been on one of those monolithic chains for a while, if you've been on Ethereum, if you've been on Solana, you have inevitably, as an application, run into some sort of performance issue. Either you have run into congestion, which means that it takes a very long time for transactions to settle, or for any sort of on-chain action to happen in your application, or your chain has gone down and there's nothing that your engineering team can do about it, because the chain, if it's not your chain, then it's somebody else's chain. And that other party is the one that needs to fix anything that goes wrong with the chain.
Right.
And so people are starting to think very deeply about going multi-chain, going to what we call application-based chains or app chains. And we see some pretty prominent projects already doing that. So I think the most recent one is DYDX that decided to move away from Ethereum and get onto their own chain because they see the performance issues. They know that this is not just an annoyance for their users, this is existential for them. Congestion prevents them, even as a DeFi application, from getting the kinds of returns and performing in the way that they'd like to. I think that what we're going to see, what we're starting to see in a pretty prominent way already, is that with respect to the next big wave of Web3 applications, which are coming from gaming and entertainment, the demand for app chains is going to be that much more acute. And that's why Saga is focusing on those two spaces. For gaming and entertainment, unlike with DeFi, the whole point of it is user experience. If it's not fun, if it's not entertaining, you don't want to really deal with that product. Unlike with DeFi, where if you're making money, then maybe you have some more tolerance for a user experience that's a little subpar. But in gaming and entertainment, it's all about having fun. And so the infrastructure really needs to be able to support that. And that is going to see the acceleration of app chains and multi-chain in the Web3 space.
So interesting. And I think it's so interesting that Saga's initial focus, like you said, is on gaming, is on the entertainment chains, and overall end user expectations these days, like especially when it comes to the metaverse, they're climbing higher and higher. It seems like there's always new headlines or tweets coming out that like criticize the appearance or experience of this new technology. How is Saga allowing for crypto-based applications to deliver the highest quality to their users and also allow them to scale?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's start with the aspect that is probably most urgent right now, which is the scalability aspect. So for most of these large chains, once you get one sort of quote unquote normal performing game on there, and so it's moderate gameplay. It's not a first person shooter game where there's lots of action happening all the time, but even moderate gameplay, once you get that kind of volume of transactions through the chain does start to slow down significantly. And that's just with one game. Once you start to add more games, then the chain slows down even more. And so that is not a fun experience for users at the end of the day. For the users who are playing those games, it's a slow game. And for users that are looking to play a variety of games, there just aren't that many available because the games are trying to get onto the right infrastructure to provide that great experience. And so we want to allow game developers and NFT project developers to deliver the same user experience without having to think about it. So if these developers were trying to sort of replicate what Web2 users have gotten used to already, or what is considered gold standard in gaming and entertainment, it would be a huge lift for them. Typically getting onto your own chain without a tool like Saga is about an 8 to 10 month engineering effort. And that is with a technically savvy engineering team. Plus there are many, many other considerations that go into building your own chain. So what we're trying to do is to automate that process. And with that automation comes much more room for experimentation, trying out new things with different groups of users, and ultimately getting onto a much more solid and scalable infrastructure for those games and NFT projects. Going forward on a deeper level, what any game dev will tell you is that the infrastructure and the limitations of the infrastructure drive the business model for the game. So if you have a limited amount of transactions that you can run through that infrastructure, then your gameplay is also going to reflect the fact that there can't be too many on-chain interactions. So maybe you're just limited to originating in-game assets and then trading those in-game assets and sort of in a non sort of instantaneous way. Whereas when you have that freedom to play, because you have the infrastructure to support that freedom, then you can start thinking about many, many different kinds of game models. And that ultimately leads to more interesting games, more interesting game design, and ultimately a more fun experience for the user.
Absolutely. I know we're so used to just instantaneous technology. And so anytime that my phone is slow or the internet is slow, like the amount of frustration that like comes over is ridiculous. And so that's what people will expect going into Web3.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And I think that it's a hard pill to swallow to tell the average user, well, the Web3 is the future. And therefore, if you don't get into Web3, then you will be quote unquote left behind, or it's just, not very cool to not be in this space. I don't believe in any of that at all. The user knows best always. And if you're providing value for them, they will inevitably use your product. If you are not doing something that's useful for them, then there's just going to be limited adoption for what it is you're building. And so for us, it's always about follow the user. I mean, they know best what is fun for them, what's useful, what's valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. And going off of that, what are your predictions regarding mass adoption of Web3, eventually the metaverse? There's just so much skepticism surrounding Meta, Mark Zuckerberg, from everyday people who are not maybe more so immersed in the Web3 space. And I'm curious to hear what you think timeline wise, as far as when the metaverse will become maybe more mainstream.
Yeah, so I do think that Metaverse is going to lead the way for Web3 adoption, because that is where the decentralization value proposition that Web3 really brings to our digital lives can really shine. So I think when we started out with financial services, it was really hard to reach the average retail user, because you as a hardcore crypto believer, you may not like the fact that Bank of America knows all of your information, for instance. But for many average users out there, the fact that when you insert your ATM card into a Bank of America machine, it generally works. Or if you're trying to do withdrawals, or deposits into your online bank account, it generally works. And there are fees, but the fees are nothing like gas prices for Ethereum, for instance. And so DeFi, I still think, is not quite there in terms of mass adoption for the average retail user. Now, you contrast that with Metaverse, which is much more of a cultural play. This Metaverse is all about allowing users control of their digital lives, being able to form communities online, being able to partake in these really important, fun, and significant cultural events. So I think that is what's going to lead to more adoption. When that actually happens, I think that right now is, well, 2022 is a difficult time because we're in a bear market for crypto. But 2023, middle of 2023 in particular, I think will be the next upswing in this market. And that's when a lot of projects that have been building during this time will be debuting production versions of their products, and those will be made available to the general public. And I think we'll see a lot more adoption then. I also think that a lot of the brands, the bigger brands that have been exploring NFTs, have been exploring Metaverse, that they've spent these last 2 years experimenting. And you're starting to see some of them really lean into Web3 in a big way, not just in entertainment, but for people like Starbucks, for instance. It's very consumer oriented. And now they're putting loyalty points on the blockchain. So I think 2023 is when you see a lot of this start to mature. But when that actually gets to the massive numbers that you're looking at for Web 2, that'll still take some time. We have about 5 billion users in Web 2, so in internet generally around the world. I think that for Web 3, the call right now, the call to action is to get to the first billion users, so just 20% of internet users. And I think that's probably doable within the next 2 to 3 years.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that's so crazy and fun to think about. And when it comes to also avatars, what are your thoughts on users purchasing pricey NFT avatars and gaining access to these high-level communities? Is that kind of the future in your opinion?
I do think that online identity, generally speaking, is going to be a big use case for Web3. And not just because, I mean, for the average user, myself included, keeping track of 20 different passwords, and that's on the low end, is a lot. And being able to sort of prove my online identity as I go through all these different applications, but at the same time maintain privacy. I mean, that's the holy grail. And I think that Web3 technology is probably the most promising in terms of being able to actually fulfill that objective. So avatars are, they're a great way, I think, for people who are big fans of having that very robust and colorful online identity to be able to seed the technology for online identity in general. And that's how it generally happens. This is what we're seeing in Web3 as well, is that people who are early adopters, true believers, they may not be focusing on a use case per se that's going to see mass adoption. I don't know if we're going to have avatars for everybody. For instance, for those 5 billion internet users, is everybody going to have an avatar? Not so sure, especially if they start to get really expensive and high end. Having said that, I do think for the people who have been purchasing avatars, who have been purchasing those NFTs and using them as their profile pictures, for instance, they have been responsible for seeding a lot of the really important technology in this space. And I think that'll be true for some time to come, at least for a year and a half or so. But ultimately, where we want to get with avatar adoption is robust online identity.
Absolutely. And before I let you go, I want to hear the future of what we can expect from Saga. I know we just launched Andromeda, which is the first chapter in Saga's journey to mainnet. Can you kind of explain Andromeda and what this step means moving forward toward creating the multiverse, and also just what's to come for Saga in general?
Yeah, absolutely. So Andromeda is the very first version of our product. So it's very, very early. Most of the features that really make Saga have not been released with Andromeda, but this is a really important tool for developers who are looking to get onto their own chains. So what Andromeda allows for is a developer can take their application, as long as it's been deployed in something we call an Ethereum virtual machine, then they would be able to automatically get it onto their own dedicated chain. Now, why did we pick the Ethereum virtual machine to start with? So again, slightly technical here, but Ethereum is a chain. It is also it is powered by a programming language. And most developers, well, all developers who are developing on top of Ethereum know this language. And so what we're allowing applications to do is to either take their existing Ethereum application or take a language that they understand because they've been building in Ethereum and get that application onto its own dedicated chain. So very simply put, we were trying to make this tool available to as many developers as possible. And the way to do that was through the Ethereum virtual machine. So that's what Andromeda does in terms of the future. So you can imagine that for most people out there who are securing chains, we call them nodes, we call them validators, they are securing maybe a handful of chains at the very most, because the way in which chains are secured, it is very manual. Once the chain goes up, how do you coordinate maintenance of that chain going forward? Oftentimes it's a Slack chat, it's a Telegram chat, it's very, very manual. Now, for us, in order to truly offer developers that automated experience, we're looking at validators who can do hundreds, if not thousands of chains. And there you're looking at scale, you're looking at automation. And a lot of the magic that happens at Saga is really on the back end to make sure that developers never notice whether they are getting onto a chain that, whether they are getting onto a chain or not. Once they fire up their application on Saga, it should just be understood or taken for granted that they are on their own dedicated block space. And so that's what our engineers will be spending the next few months doing. We do believe in very iterative release cycles. So unlike many blockchain projects that maybe wait a few months between releases, we generally put them out every month or so. But that's all on the technical side. In terms of how we're going out there in the market, we opened up a Saga Innovator program at the same time that we announced our seed raise. And that Innovator program started off with 55 projects. We wanted to hold it to a smaller group so that we could give each and every one individual attention and a really meaningful product experience. We're super excited about all these innovators. They were all picked because they are doing something highly innovative in Web3. They're really moving the Web3 gaming and entertainment spaces forward. We thought that we would wait a little while to open up a second group of innovators, but given the level of demand, I think we're going to do that sooner rather than later. So we'll be seeing a lot more people building on Saga, but we're just super excited to be working with these developers. I mean, every one of their projects is so cool, and we're just inspired by their passion, by their ingenuity, and the fact that we can be a part of that is really why we do what we do.
I know you're definitely working with some incredible people, and obviously everything that Saga is doing is so incredible. I can't wait to see what's to come. Rebecca, thank you so much for your time and for all of your insight and for joining us on the Blockchain Hustler today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Kaylee. It's great to be with you.